What would you do if you walked into work and found two little girls, sick, starving, and asleep on your office couch in janitor uniforms? Would you call security, or would you listen to their story? He was a ruthless millionaire CEO, until a soft voice whispered, "We were waiting for mommy." This is a story of a storm that brought a broken family back together. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where are you watching this from, and what time is it there? I'd love to know who's sharing this journey with me. Damian Blake had walked through those lavish glass doors 1,000 times, but never once had he paused, not for the art on the walls, not for the security guards who bowed, not even for the desperate stares of interns praying to be noticed. But today, everything stopped. The moment his eyes fell on the fragile forms curled on the leather lobby couch, time slowed, the world blurred, and the noise of the city vanished under the weight of something deeper than shock. It was heartbreak. Two tiny girls, barely 6, were dressed in uniforms far too big, their sleeves soaked, collars stained, their cheeks sunken and pale. One had her head resting on the other's lap, her thin arms wrapped around her sister as if shielding her from the cold air and the cruel world. The other clutched a faded cleaning rag like it was a toy. Damian's breath caught as he took in their trembling bodies, eyes shut tightly, as if even in sleep they feared being seen, moved, or forgotten. His guard stepped forward automatically, barking into radios, but his voice quiet, low, unlike any tone he had used in decades, cut through the marble echo. "Don't touch them." Stunned, the guards halted mid-step, and Damian slowly approached. His polished shoes clicking softly against the glossy floor, his heart pounding like he was approaching something sacred and shattered. Crouching down, he gently touched one of the girl's shoulders and whispered, "Sweetheart, are you okay?" Her eyelashes fluttered open, and what stared back at him were eyes full of pain, far too mature for a child. Her lips parted as she licked them, dry and chapped, and murmured, "We were just waiting for mommy." But she never came back. The second girl stirred at the sound, her body burning with fever, and Damian instinctively placed his hand on her forehead. Hot, dangerously hot, and his own chest began to ache. "When did you eat last?" he asked, already fearing the answer. The first girl hesitated, looked at her sister, and whispered, 2 days, we shared a piece of bread." Those 6 words slammed into Damian like a freight train, and in that instant, the carefully built walls of wealth, logic, and pride he'd constructed around himself began to crumble. He sat down beside them, utterly lost, then quickly rose and barked new orders. "Call a doctor, bring food. Now." And this time, no one questioned him. Assistants scattered, secretaries peeked from behind walls. The entire building held its breath as the cold, calculated CEO cradled a sick child against his chest like she was his own. As he wrapped his coat around her tiny shoulders, she leaned into him with such blind trust that tears stung his eyes, ones he hadn't allowed himself to shed since his mother's funeral. Food arrived: warm soup, toast, fruited as the girls ate slowly, carefully. Damian sat beside them, silently watching their small hands tremble with every bite. When one of them offered him a half of her bread, he nearly broke. "This child, starving, still trying to give. What's your name?" he asked softly. "I'm Emma," the older one said, brushing her sister's hair gently, "and this is Elsie. We clean sometimes. To help Grandma." The words stabbed deeper than any boardroom betrayal, deeper than any market crash. These were not just homeless kids, they were working, suffering, surviving in silence while the world passed them by. The doctor arrived shortly after and examined them with a seriousness that made Damian's stomach churn. Dehydration, malnutrition, and early-stage pneumonia. "They need rest, warmth, and care. Now," the doctor warned. Without thinking, Damian nodded. "Take them to my suite upstairs. Cancel all my meetings. Have my personal team get them new clothes, everything. I want no expense spared." The staff exchanged bewildered looks but obeyed. As the girls were gently lifted into warm blankets and wheeled toward the executive elevator, Emma looked back and whispered, "Thank you, mister. You're really nice. Like how mommy said daddy used to be." Damian couldn't breathe. Those words hit something he couldn't name, something long buried beneath ambition and loss. He followed them up, not caring what investors thought, what tabloids might write, what partners might whisper. None of it mattered now. All he knew was that in the center of his empire, on the couch he had passed 1,000,000 times without a glance, He had found something more powerful than Profithe had found purpose. And as he stood watching two fragile souls wrapped in warmth and safety for the first time in years, his hands shook not from fear or weakness, but from the realization that he wasn't saving them, they were saving him. As the elevator doors slid open to his penthouse suite, Damien stepped in behind the girls, watching them gaze around with hesitant awe at the shimmering glass walls, gold accents, and leather furnishings they had never seen in their young lives. Their small hands clutching the blanket corners like it might all disappear if they blinked. Emma gently nudged Elsie and whispered, "It's like a castle." And Damien, who had once designed this space to impress Billionaire, suddenly realized it had never felt more valuable than in that innocent observation. He lowered the lights to a warm glow and guided them to the oversized couch, kneeling to their level as they sat quietly, waiting for permission to even breathe. The silence felt sacred, until the food arrived: hot soup, fresh bread, apple slices, and warm cocoa set gently on the table before them. Emma reached for a spoon but paused, looking up with worried eyes. "Can we really eat this?" And Damien's throat tightened as he nodded, "Yes, sweetheart, every bite." Watching their tiny fingers tremble as they fed each other carefully, Elsie breaking her toast in half without hesitation. It wasn't just hunger, it was practiced survival. The way they offered before they took, the way they chewed slowly like trying to make each moment last. No one had taught them luxury, only how to share pain. Damien sat down across from them and, for the first time in years, felt still, not as a CEO, but as a man watching something sacred unfold. Halfway through the meal, Emma looked up with bread crumbs on her lips and said with gentle certainty, "You're kind, like Daddy would have been." And Damien's heart dropped into his stomach, a strange chill coursing through him, as if she had unknowingly cracked open a sealed chamber in his soul. He swallowed hard but couldn't speak. Her words echoed louder than any boardroom confrontation he had ever faced, for reasons he couldn't yet name. He wanted to protect them with his life. He called his assistant with a voice gentler than anyone had ever heard him use and said, "Find them everything: dresses, coats, pajamas, shoes, new ones, beautiful ones. Make sure they never wear rags again." Within an hour, designer outfits and teddy bears filled the room, and the girls gasped as gift bags were laid out like Christmas morning. Elsie hugged a plush bunny and whispered, "This one's warm," as if warmth had been a stranger until now. Damien stood frozen as they explored the small mountain of care he had summoned, feeling a strange pressure build in his chest, not from pride, but from unfamiliar emotions he had long buried beneath ambition. He sat quietly as they changed into clean clothes in his private guest room, and when they returned wearing soft pink dresses and sparkly shoes that actually fit, he felt like someone had hit a reset button on his entire life. Emma spun once and asked shyly, "Do we look normal now?" And Damien blinked back a sting of tears, nodding with a lump in his throat. "You look perfect." He called the doctor again to run tests, and when the man confirmed their fevers were lowering, Damien exhaled for what felt like the first time all day. He tucked them into the guest bed, but the girls couldn't sleep, not because they were restless, but because they were safe, and that feeling was foreign. They lay wide-eyed, staring at the ceiling, whispering stories to each other. Damien listened from the doorframe, one hand on the wall, as the ache inside him grew unbearable. He had money, power, legacy, but these two little lives stirred something that nothing else ever had. He sat on the edge of the bed, smoothed their blankets, and asked softly, "Would you like me to stay?" And when both girls reached out wordlessly to hold his hands, something unexplainable happened. A man who once measured life in quarterly earnings, now measured it by heartbeats and breaths beside two strangers who felt too familiar. As the room dimmed and their eyelids finally fell, Damien remained there, unmoving, his hands still in theirs, his soul strangely full and cracked at once. He didn't know who their father was, or where their mother had gone, but he knew this. The moment he saw them on that lobby couch, fate had shifted, and now everything that once mattered: stocks, negotiations, press release had grown silent beneath the tiny snores of two sleeping angels who made him feel human again. The room was wrapped in a sleepy hush, the only sound being the soft hum of the fireplace as its flickering light danced across the faces of two fragile girls now nestled into his leather couch, wrapped in blankets far too big for their tiny frames, their eyes fluttering open and shut like butterflies fighting rest. Damien sat a few feet away, his elbows resting on his knees, his gaze locked not on his laptop, not on any stock ticker or investor report, but on the slow rhythmic breaths of Emma and Elsie, the only numbers that seemed to matter now. He didn't know what he was feeling: guilt, protectiveness, a strange ache he hadn't known his heart was capable of, but it gripped him tighter with every passing second. Then, in the quietest moment, Emma lifted her head slightly and looked at him, not with fear, but with hesitant honesty, and said, "Grandma told us Mommy went to heaven when we were born." Damien's spine stiffened, his mind tried to catch up, but she wasn't done. "But once, before she got sick, she showed us a picture of someone. She said he was someone special. He looked like you." Her voice cracked on the last word, and Damien's entire body turned to stone. The air felt heavier, as if it dared not move. He leaned in slowly and asked, barely above a whisper, Do you still have that picture?" And Emma gave a small nod, then dug her tiny fingers into the side pocket of their backpack, pulling out a folded, weather-worn envelope. Time seemed to slow as she passed it to him with trembling hands, as if she were handing him her whole life. Damien unfolded it gently, careful not to tear the brittle edges, and there resting back at him from a faded photograph was a face he hadn't seen in nearly 7 years. Isabelle. Her eyes, still full of life and mischief, were locked on his in the image, her head resting on his shoulder, her smile unguarded. It was their honeymoon. Paris, 2016. He remembered that day, the way she laughed when pigeons landed on their cafe table, the way she kissed his nose just before the shutter clicked. The moment was frozen in time, but now it struck him like a dagger. His fingers trembled as he gripped the photo, and his voice caught in his throat as he choked, Where did you get this?" But he already knew. Emma answered gently, "Mommy kept it in her drawer. She said she wanted us to know he was once kind." Damien's mind spiraled into chaos. Isabelle had been pregnant when they separated. He had no idea, no warning. Only the bitter sting of lawyers and pride tearing them apart. She had walked out with her head high and her heart shattered, but she had protected a secret far more precious than anything he'd ever owned. A knot of guilt, grief, and something unnamable twisted deep in his chest as he stared at the photo again, seeing Isabelle's eyes now mirrored in 2 small faces sitting inches away. Elsie yawned and leaned on Emma's shoulder, unaware of the storm brewing behind Damien's calm expression. How could he have missed it? The shape of their eyes, the curve of their cheeks, the way Emma tilted her head exactly like Isabelle used to when she was worried. Damien swallowed hard and asked, "Do you remember your mommy's name?" And Emma nodded, "Isabelle. Isabelle Moore. She used to sing to us, even when she got tired." At the sound of her full name, a quiet sob escaped Damien's lips, and he covered his mouth with his hand, his eyes brimming with tears he could no longer hold back. He stood abruptly, pacing the room in silence, hand on his forehead, memories flooding in like a tidal wave. The laughter, the arguments, the final goodbye on the courthouse steps where she clutched her stomach and said nothing. The way he never looked back because he was too proud, too angry, too blind to ask if there was more to the story. Now that story was sitting in front of him, in pink pajamas and tiny socks, watching him with innocent eyes full of the woman he had once loved more than anything. He sat down again, quieter this time, more fragile than he had felt in years, and whispered, Do you know who your daddy was?" But Emma shook her head. "Mommy said maybe we'd meet him one day, but maybe he didn't want to be found." That sentence gutted him. He wanted to scream, to cry, to go back in time and change everything, but he couldn't. All he could do now was face the truth that had been living without him for 6 long years. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, didn't even know how to say the words. But one thing was clear: this wasn't just fate or coincidence. This was a second chance the universe had given him in the most unexpected, humbling, and fragile way. And as the girls leaned against each other once more, dozing off beneath the warmth of a life they never expected, Damien sat beside them, clutching a photo that once belonged to love and now belonged to truth. The moment the girls drifted into sleep, their soft breaths rising and falling beneath his office blanket, Damien stood in a trance, the photograph of Isabelle still trembling in his hand, and without a word to anyone, he stepped into his private chamber, shut the heavy door behind him, and locked it with a soft click, as if sealing himself inside a memory that refused to be forgotten. The walls of the room, once symbols of his ambition, now closed in around him like confessions. And his footsteps felt heavier as he approached the tall mahogany cabinet tucked in the corner, the one drawer he hadn't opened in years. With shaking hands, He dug into his inner pocket, retrieved a small brass key, and slid it into the lock, the metallic click echoing like thunder in the silence. As the drawer slid open, a flood of buried time came rushing back. Stacks of letters, yellowed edges of photographs, a necklace she once left behind, and a dried red rose from the night he first told her he loved her. He stared at it all like a man watching his own ghost. His fingers hovered over the letters before picking one marked with his name, but never mailed her handwriting, instantly pulling him into a time when things were softer, warmer, real. Unfolding the paper, he began to read, and each word shattered another piece of the fortress he'd built around his heart. I still believe in the man you used to be, Damien. I want to tell you something, but I don't know if you'll care anymore. I'm scared, not just of your anger, but of losing the last part of us. I'm pregnant, Damien. You're going to be a father. If I don't send this, maybe it's because I'm not strong enough to hope anymore. The letter fell from his hands like a feather, landing gently on the floor as he collapsed to his knees, both palms clutching his face. And the sob that escaped him was raw, broken, utterly human. Years of regret, pride, silence, and distance hit him all at once like a collapsing wave, drowning him in the truth he had unknowingly walked past for 6 birthdays, 6 winters, 6 first steps, 6 whispered prayers for a father who never came. He hadn't just failed Isabelle, he had failed the 2 most innocent lives born from their love. Crawling to the drawer, he pulled out photo after photo, love notes folded with care, and even one of their old mixtapes they used to dance to in the kitchen while cooking pasta barefoot on a Sunday night. Memories that once made him smile now cut like glass. He found another note, this one scribbled hastily in pencil, likely never intended for him to see. If anything happens to me, I just want them to be safe. I pray their father's heart still remembers us. Damien clutched it to his chest like a lifeline, and for the first time, he didn't feel like a billionaire, or a CEO, or the man Time magazine once called unshakable. He felt like a father who had been absent, unknowingly exiled from the very family he once dreamed of building. He rose slowly, eyes red, chest heaving, and looked at his own reflection in the office mirror. His sharp-tailored suit couldn't hide the cracks forming across his soul. He whispered to himself, how could I not know? Then turned back to the couch outside, where Emma and Elsie lay curled together, holding onto each other the way only children who've known loss could. He opened the door and walked back out, his heart heavier but somehow clearer, his pace slower as if time had shifted under his feet. Kneeling beside the girls, he gently brushed a strand of hair from Emma's cheek. And her lips curled faintly in sleep, whispering, Mommy. And he closed his eyes, swallowing the ache rising in his throat. Everything he had, his cars, his empire suddenly felt meaningless in the face of what had been taken and what he had missed. But this time, he wouldn't run, wouldn't hide behind meetings and mergers. These weren't just girls in need, they were his daughters, born of love, wrapped in pain, and gifted back to him by fate when he least deserved it. The night grew quiet again, but his mind burned with decisions, with a vow unspoken but urgent. He would never let them feel alone again, and even if the past couldn't be changed, he would fight for every moment of the future they still had. The morning sun cast a gentle light on the city as Damien held the girl's small hands, the weight of truth still fresh on his chest like a wound that refused to close. And as their car moved through unfamiliar streets far from luxury towers and marble lobbies, he couldn't stop glancing at them. Emma looking out the window in silence. Elsie clutching a worn corner of her backpack, both unaware of the depth of the journey they were taking. They had given him an address, one etched in their memory like a lullaby, the blue house with the crooked step and roses that don't grow anymore, and when the car finally stopped in front of it, Damien stared at the peeling paint, the cracked window panes, and the sagging roofline with a rising lump in his throat. This was where they had lived, struggled, waited, while he had existed in a world of gold and glass, completely blind to the pain left behind. The door creaked open before they even knocked, and there stood an elderly woman, hunched, with kind eyes dimmed by exhaustion. Her hands trembled the moment she saw the girls. Emma? Elsie? She breathed, pulling them into her arms with a desperate sob that seemed to come from years of silent suffering. Damien stepped back instinctively, unsure if he even deserved to be part of this reunion, but her eyes found his, and her face crumpled as she whispered, Damien, you came. He nodded, barely able to find his voice, and followed them inside where faded photographs, threadbare cushions, and a lingering scent of old tea filled the room with memories he never knew existed. As the girls sat beside their grandmother, showing her their new shoes and plush bunnies, the woman wiped her eyes and turned to him, voice cracking. She tried. "Damien. Isabelle tried so many times to reach you, but your office blocked her. Your assistant said you were moving on, and she didn't want to ruin your life." Each word landed like a hammer on his heart, and he lowered his head, ashamed, haunted by the realization that his pride had built a fortress so high even love couldn't climb it. "She died the night they were born," the woman continued, tears trailing down her cheeks. "She held their tiny hands, kissed their foreheads, and whispered your name, then she was gone before morning." Damien's knees nearly gave out, and he grabbed the back of a chair to steady himself, overcome by a tidal wave of regret, so fierce it nearly knocked the air from his lungs. He had missed the moment his daughters came into the world, missed Isabelle's final breath, missed every chance to make things right while there was still time. The woman handed him a folded paper. It was Isabelle's last letter, never mailed, stained at the corners. In it, she wrote, "If I don't make it, tell Damien I forgave him long ago. Tell him the girls will love him, just like I always did." His fingers shook as he clutched the page to his heart, the pain unbearable, and yet inside it, a sliver of grace. Isabelle hadn't died angry, only heartbroken. Later that afternoon, they all walked together down the broken sidewalks to a quiet cemetery nestled behind a church, and as they reached a simple headstone surrounded by weeds and dried roses, Damien dropped to his knees in front of it, his daughters on either side. Unsure of why tears filled their father's eyes but holding his hands like they belonged there all along, the name carved into stone blurred behind the flood in his eyes. Isabelle Moore, beloved mother, gentle Suland. In that moment, surrounded by silence, Damien's voice broke. "I'm sorry. I didn't know, I would have come running. I would have given up everything." Emma leaned against him and whispered, "Mommy's watching us, right?" And he nodded, pressing his forehead against the cold marble, whispering prayers, promises, and apologies that had waited 6 long years to be spoken. Elsie placed a flower she had picked from the roadside beside the grave, and the simple act felt like a benediction, a release of grief, and the beginning of something new. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the nearby trees, and Damien looked up to the sky, wishing for one more moment with Isabelle, one more chance to tell her he was ready now, not to be a billionaire, not to be admired, but to be a man worthy of the life she left behind. As they walked back toward the house, hand in hand, his arms wrapped protectively around his daughters, Damien didn't speak, didn't plan, didn't calculate. He just felt, and in the ache of that afternoon, he found a clarity he had never known. Money couldn't erase the past, but love, if given now fully, fiercely, honestly, might just redeem it. As Damien guided Emma and Elsie back to the car, their small hands wrapped tightly in his, something shifted in the rhythm of his heartbeat. It was no longer driven by profit margins or boardroom conquests but by the gentle squeeze of trust from 2 little souls who unknowingly reassembled his shattered heart. When he brought them home, not to a hotel suite or a guest house, but to the grand estate he had once built with Isabelle in mind, there was no press conference, no social media post, just quiet footsteps through the marble foyer as their wide eyes took in chandeliers, portraits, and silence that no longer felt proud, only empty. That silence cracked the moment Emma gasped at the sight of a wall-sized bookshelf, and Elsie pointed toward a spiral staircase like it was a magical tree trunk. Damien knelt down and whispered, "This is your home now. Forever." And something about the way they looked at him, startled, unsure, but willing to believe, made him choke back a tear he didn't want them to see. Over the next few days, his world transformed, not by force, but by soft interruption. Meetings were postponed, ties replaced by flower-stained t-shirts, and the once imposing CEO could now be found sitting cross-legged on the floor, learning how to braid pigtails through trial and error as Emma giggled and Elsie corrected his shaky fingers. They taught him how to make jelly sandwiches, without the crusts, how bedtime stories worked best with silly voices, and how monsters under the bed always disappeared if you promised to stay until they fell asleep. Every corner of his mansion now echoed with laughter where once there had only been the clicking of polished shoes and the low buzz of expensive wine pouring into lonely glasses. His staff, at first stunned by the sudden change, found themselves smiling more, helping him. Turn the east wing into a pastel paradise filled with storybooks, glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, a handmade sign that read, "Princesses sleep here," and drawers stuffed with things the girls had never dared dream of owning. He read parenting books late into the night, highlighted tips, burned eggs twice, forgot socks often, but the girls didn't mind. They greeted every clumsy gesture with patience. The same kind Isabelle had once wrapped around his sharp edges, and when darkness fell and the house quieted, he would lie in bed and stare at the ceiling, whispering to the woman he'd lost, "They smile like you, they forgive like you, and I swear I'll never fail them again." The headline soon roared, "Ruthless CEO becomes full-time father, twins melt Ice King's heart," but for once, Damien didn't care what the world printed. He was too busy helping Emma tie her shoelaces while she explained the importance of glitter pens, or nodding as Elsie told him her theory that clouds were just sky pillows for angels like mommy. The shift wasn't just personal, it was purposeful. One night, as he stared at Isabelle's photograph framed on his nightstand, he whispered, "You always wanted to help the world, let me do it for you," and within weeks, the paperwork was filed. The Isabelle Grace Foundation, dedicated to single mothers, orphaned children, and lost families who needed a second chance. He poured resources into shelters, launched education programs, and ensured every child who walked through their doors received warmth, food, safety and, most of all, dignity. The press asked why he chose this path, and during one rare interview, he answered with moist eyes and a trembling voice, "Because someone helped me when I didn't know I needed saving. Me daughters saved me, and my wife. She still saves me every day through them." His boardroom now had a new kind of energy, one powered not by fear, but by empathy. His employees, inspired by his change, began volunteering, mentoring, donating, and the company that was once feared became admired for something more valuable than its profits, its purpose. But none of that compared to the simple moments watching the girls race down the hallway in princess gowns, hearing them giggle over bubble baths, or feeling tiny arms wrap around him as they whispered, "Good night, Daddy," 3 words he thought he'd never hear, yet now couldn't live without. He often stood at their bedroom door just to listen to them breathe, still half in disbelief that life had brought him here not through ambition, but grace, and though Isabelle's absence still carved a quiet ache in every perfect day, her love remained etched into every smile, every lesson, every bedtime kiss the girls placed on his cheek before sleep claimed them. In their laughter, her spirit lived on, and Damien finally understood that the truest legacy wasn't wealth, or empires, or names carved into buildings. It was love passed down in whispers and lullabies, rebuilt one soft, forgiving day at a time. The house had grown quieter that Sunday afternoon, the kind of hush that follows mornings of giggles and pancake syrup and warm hugs by the fireplace, and as Damien sat on the sunroom couch watching the twins play with building blocks nearby, he marveled at how natural it felt though. A heart once built of ice now ached with every smile they gave him. But upstairs, as Emma explored an old keepsake box, their grandmother had recently passed down, tucked beneath knitted scarves and folded handkerchiefs, worn thin by time, her small fingers brushed against something different, a sealed, yellowed envelope, marked only by her mother's careful handwriting. To Damien, if he ever returns, her curious voice floated down the stairs, "Daddy, I found something for you." And when she placed it in his hands, he immediately felt the weight of it, not just paper, but memory, pain, and things left unsaid. The girls watched him with wide, innocent eyes as he opened it slowly, fingers trembling like a man standing on a cliff of everything he'd run from. Inside, the handwriting danced with urgency and tenderness, written in hurried lines, "Damien, if you're reading this, then somehow you found them. Our girls. I don't know what fate has planned, but I'm going into labor today, and my heart is full of both fear and love. If anything happens, tell them I love them more than life itself. And if you are reading this, tell them about us. About who you were, the man I trusted more than anyone once. I pray they know that side of you. I pray they know love through you." Damien couldn't breathe, his vision blurred as the words echoed in his mind louder than any boardroom speech or market bell he'd ever heard. He folded the letter to his chest, pressing it tightly as if trying to close the years of silence between them, tears slipping down his face, not with drama, but with the quiet devastation of a man who had finally touched the edge of a love he thought he had lost forever. The room dimmed around him, But he didn't care. He saw Isabelle's face in every word. Her courage in every curve of her pen, her hope hanging on a future she never got to live through. Emma leaned into his side, whispering, "Is that from Mommy?" And he nodded, unable to speak, only managing to wrap both girls into his arms as if anchoring himself to the only part of Isabelle he still had. He kissed their foreheads softly and finally found his voice, low and raw. "Your mommy was the bravest, most loving soul I've ever known. And she wrote this so you'd never forget that." That night, long after the twins had drifted off to sleep with the letter safely placed in a locket between their pillows, Damien stood by the fireplace and stared at the flames. Reliving moments he'd buried dancing barefoot with Isabelle in their tiny kitchen, promising her forever, walking away too angry to listen, and now, reading a goodbye meant for a man who should have never left. The guilt throbbed, but more than that, a promise began to take root, not just to be better, but to become the man she believed he could still be. He walked into his study and opened a blank journal, wrote the date, and began a letter to her own. He would keep writing, page after page, every night, telling her about the girls' laughter, their dreams, how Emma wanted to become a teacher, and Elsie swore she could speak to butterflies. He wrote about their kindness, how they shared everything, even their grief, and how they still asked about her every evening, their voices soft but fearless. The next morning, he framed Isabelle's letter and hung it above the twins' beds, and beneath it, placed a plaque that read, "Her love made us whole again." He began organizing a reading program at the foundation in her name, built a garden full of her favorite lilies, and told the girls bedtime stories about a mother who once loved their father so deeply, she left behind light even in her absence. Every day, he folded lunchbox notes with hand-drawn hearts, signed Love, Daddy and Mommy, because he wanted her presence to wrap around them always, and while the pain of what could have been still lingered like the scent of rain on pavement, it no longer haunted him. It moved him, shaped him, reminded him that even in death, Isabelle was still building something through him. He no longer feared vulnerability, no longer ran from emotions that once felt inconvenient. Instead, he embraced every whispered, "Daddy," every mismatched drawing, every innocent question about the stars and heaven and whether Mommy was watching. He answered honestly, with warmth, and when he looked at Emma and Elsie now, he saw not just his children but a second chance written in their eyes. The letter had been lost in a drawer, but its message had landed exactly where it needed to, a father's broken soul, ready now to rise, to heal, to be the man Isabelle had never stopped believing in. The days grew lighter, not just in season, but in soul, as Damien found himself immersed in routines once foreign, packing lunchboxes with heart-shaped sandwiches, learning the lyrics to lullabies, and navigating the organized chaos of school mornings where mismatched socks and half-brushed ponytails were part of the magic. But nothing prepared him for the emotion that would sneak up at a simple school event: family portrait day where the gymnasium buzzed with children holding up colorful drawings and proud parents clapping from foldable chairs. Damien had almost cancelled, overwhelmed by meetings, but when Emma had looked up and said, "It's okay if you're busy, Daddy, we'll just draw your smile from memory," something inside him shattered, and he cleared his entire schedule to sit in the front row, heart pounding like it was his first board meeting. The twins appeared on stage with oversized art paper in their tiny hands, their cheeks rosy from excitement, and when they turned their picture toward the crowd, time seemed to still. It wasn't a fancy mansion or a flashy car or even a perfectly drawn face. It was a tall figure, sketched with uneven lines, standing between two girls beneath a giant yellow sun, each hand linked tightly, and all three smiling with joy that seemed to spill off the page. Gasps echoed through the room. Not because of the drawing's perfection but because of its truth. Tears welled in Damien's eyes as Emma stepped forward, her voice clear but tender, "This is our family, that's our daddy. He didn't know we were his, but he came back anyway." A silence fell over the room as children and teachers turned toward him, and Elsie added softly, "That means his heart always remembered us, even if his mind didn't." And in that fragile, brave confession, Damien felt something sacred move inside him, the final wall within him crumbling like a dam, releasing years of regret, longing, and now, the pride of being seen through their eyes, not as a CEO, but simply as Dad. He stood slowly, clapping through the mist in his vision, and the twins beamed with a light that outshone every chandelier in his mansion. Later, backstage, they ran into his arms and buried their faces in his coat, giggling as they asked if he liked the drawing, and he knelt, held their cheeks in his palms, and whispered, "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, it's everything I never knew I needed." As they walked home, Emma explained the sun above them symbolized mommy watching, and that the smiles meant she approved. And for the first time, Damien didn't feel haunted by Isabelle's memory, felt guided by it. That night, instead of a bedtime story, they read their drawing aloud together, pointing at the lines and explaining each color, each detail, and Damien promised to hang it in his office, framed in gold, so every person who entered would know what truly mattered now. And when the girls were asleep, cuddled beside each other under pink blankets and glow-in-the-dark stars, Damien sat alone in their room, watching them breathe, realizing the man he was before them no longer existed. He had been reborn not through tragedy, but through the purity of their love. He thought about the empires he had built, the millions he had earned, the accolades that once lined his ego, and none of it compared to this quiet evening filled with crayons, bedtime kisses, and forgiveness that never had to be earned. The following day, he brought the drawing to the Isabelle Grace Foundation, placing it at the front entrance beside a quote from Isabelle's last letter. "Let them know your heart, Damien." Volunteers and visitors alike paused to look at it, touched by the innocence that now served as the heartbeat of everything he stood for. And while reporters kept calling, begging for interviews, he refused, telling his assistant, "I've already said everything I need to own that picture." Back at home, he began writing his will, naming Emma and Elsie not just as heirs to his wealth, but to his purpose, ensuring they'd never feel alone again. And when the twins found him crying over a legal document and asked if he was sad, he laughed through tears and said, "No, sweethearts. I'm just making sure love never forgets you again." The girls hugged him tightly, and in that moment, he knew that Isabelle's wish had come true, not because he'd given them a father, but because they had given him a chance to be one. In a world obsessed with what people leave behind in buildings and numbers, Damien Blake finally understood the only legacy worth fighting for was written in crayon, hanging on a wall, drawn by two little girls who reminded him that real love doesn't demand perfection, only presence. The morning sun cast a golden glow across the city skyline, but no boardroom lights flickered on inside Damien Blake's empire. Instead, the once feared CEO stood on the steps of a newly constructed stone and glass building nestled between towering financial institutions, not a bank, not a hedge fund, but a haven, dressed in a charcoal suit softened by a light blue teeth color. Emma said reminded her of mommy's eyes, waited with quiet resolve, holding the hands of his twin daughters, their matching white bows fluttering gently in the wind. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashed. But this wasn't the usual media circus of acquisitions and global dominance. This was something different, something raw and human. A tall banner unfurled behind him revealing the name in bold letters. Isabelle's home, a shelter for children and mothers, and gasps rippled through the crowd. This wasn't a donation made for tax breaks or a philanthropic strategy. It was an altar of apology, a tribute to love, and a vow carved in stone. As the questions started flying, one young journalist, visibly moved, asked, "Why would a man known for building skyscrapers suddenly care about lost children?" And for the first time in his career, Damien didn't speak from notes or strategy. He looked directly into the lens, voice steady but thick with truth, and said, "Because power means nothing if your own blood is sleeping hungry on a lobby couch. I didn't lose a deal that day. I found my whole world in the eyes of two girls who reminded me what love looks like, when it's patient, when it's persistent, when it forgives without asking." The crowd fell silent, not out of confusion, but reverence. Behind him, Emma and Elsie beamed, each holding a corner of the plaque with their mother's name engraved, while volunteers and social workers stood with tears in their eyes. The ribbon was cut not with gold-plated scissors but by the tiny hands of the girls who had unknowingly saved a man's soul. As the doors opened and children from shelters across the city walked in wide-eyed, Damien knelt to greet them personally, calling each by name, handing out warm coats and tiny backpacks filled with storybooks, toothpaste, snacks, and handwritten notes that read, "You are not forgotten. You are loved." That evening, the footage went viral not because of sensationalism, but because humanity had cracked open the image of a corporate giant and revealed the father within. Social media overflowed with hashtags like #CEO of Hearts, #Isabelle's Home, and #When Power Turns to Love. while people from around the world donated to the cause or shared stories of loss, second chances, and unconditional love. Meanwhile, back in his office, the infamous portrait of Damien shaking hands with presidents and billionaires had been replaced by the crayon drawing of three figures under a bright sun. Investors called, confused at first, but many soon followed his lead. Moved by the shift in culture, realizing that business could be more than profit, it could be legacy. Schools reached out for partnerships, city councils offered funding, and within weeks, the waiting list for Isabelle's home tripled. At night, Damien tucked the twins into bed and told them how proud Mommy would be, how she would have smiled to see so many children wrapped in the warmth she once only dreamed of giving, and the girls, wise beyond their years, simply whispered, "She already knows, Daddy. She sees everything from her sky window." Sometimes, he'd return to the shelter alone after dark and sit quietly on the garden bench, listening to the laughter echoing from inside, a sound he once feared he'd never hear again. One evening, a teenage girl from the shelter handed him a note that read, "I didn't believe in good men until I met you. Thank you for proving us wrong." Damien folded it into his pocket, heart heavy and full all at once, and slowly, his identity transformed not just in headlines, but in the mirror. The man who once ruled with an iron will now lead with an open heart, and in every board meeting, in every decision, he asked a new question: would Isabelle be proud of this? And if the answer was no, he changed course, unapologetically. Emma and Elsie would sometimes join him at public events, not as photo ops, but as symbols of the story behind the suit, the reason behind the rebuilding. And though he never stopped grieving the years lost, he honored them with every second he reclaimed, with every bedtime story, every shared laugh, every rescued soul who walked through Isabelle's home and left believing that love still had a place in this world. And when people asked what changed him, he never hesitated to say, "A couch, 2 girls. And a letter I was never meant to read, but desperately needed to." That building, once just bricks and vision, now stood as a lighthouse in the storm for countless forgotten families, but for Damien Blake it was a gravestone, a rebirth, a promise, and a prayer answered too late, yet just in time to make everything right again.